This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can order all these bombs on cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, I'm Nitahone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. Normally, these videos look back in Magic's history at the best performing cards in various competitive constructed formats, but as usual, when a new limited format comes around, I do a top 10 about that new format and discuss the 10 biggest bombs in the set. I've spent the last week or so talking about all the cards in the format and giving them my grades. So if you're interested in seeing more than just the biggest bombs in the set, you can also find a link to that playlist in the description below. So these are the 10 cards that you most want to have in your sealed pool or in a pack one pick one scenario. The cards in this list are all so powerful that they can bring you back from the brink of defeat while also being capable of sealing a game away for you if you were at parity or ahead. Now let's get started with number 10. At number 10 I have Theater of Horrors. Looking at other people's set reviews, I feel like people are kind of sleeping on this. To me, it's too reminiscent of cards like Phyrexian Arena or Outpost Siege, cards that just draw you an extra card every turn for it to be anything but a bomb. Sure, you do have to do damage to your opponent to be able to draw those cards, basically anyway. Obviously, you exile a card every turn anyway, but you only get access to them once you do damage to your opponent. But sort of a weird way this card works that you need to keep in mind is as soon as you do damage to your opponent, you have access to all the cards that have been exiled with Theater of Horrors. So any cards that got exiled that you couldn't play before, suddenly you can cast them that turn. There aren't cards that disappear at the end of your turn like a lot of these exile effects. They stay in exile and they're ready for you to use them as soon as you do damage to your opponent. And obviously it has an ability that lets you do damage to your opponent, though it's going to be hard that specific turn to also cast whatever you hit because the ability costs 4. But the point is, this is going to grant you massive card advantage and be the kind of card that in a couple of turns will suddenly make it so your opponent's completely overwhelmed and can't really stop you from winning. At number 9, I have Kaya's Wrath. This would be higher on the list, except for that it's so hard to cast with double white, double black as its cost. It is a very powerful board sweeper, and it's especially powerful because the Orzhov decks are filled with creatures with value when they die. There's all the cards with Afterlife, of course. Plus, the fact that you gain life off of this is nice. Sometimes the problem with Wrath spells is that you cast it and suddenly your board has nothing on it and your opponent's going to get a chance to play something and put it on the board before you do. Gaining a few life does mitigate against that a little and will make it feel a little less bad. But I think no matter what, this Wrath is going to benefit you more than your opponent because of the Afterlife mechanic. I think the 8 cards I have ahead of it are more first pickable than it is, obviously. But it's really just because of the mana cost. You know, there's like probably a 60% chance you just won't be able to play this even if you first pick it because that mana cost is so difficult. At number 8, we have Hydroid Crassus, which is my favorite card on this list, even though it's not the number 1 card. I think it does at least deserve to be on the list. Part of the reason it isn't higher is because depending on what your mana situation is, sometimes it's not going to be that impressive, but it's like lowest of the low case of paying 4 mana and drawing a card and gaining a life and having a 2/2 Flying Trampler. That might not be a bomb, but that is pretty good. If you cast it for that, you're going to come out ahead in terms of cards. You're going to get a 2-for-1. Obviously, it does have a worst case where if you have 3 mana, you're just playing a 1/1 Flying Trampler, but you're not going to do that. As the game goes on, it scales to bigger and bigger. By the time you pay 6 for it, I think then you've moved into bomb territory. You're getting a 4/4 Flying Trampler that draws you 2 cards and gains you 2 life, and of course it gets better and better the later in the game it goes. Between giving you a large evasive attacker and drawing you multiple cards, it's pretty hard to say that this isn't a bomb. At number 7, I have Biogenic Ooze. So, your worst case scenario here is that you get a 5 mana 2/2 sort of out of the deal. So what I mean is you can pay 5 and play this and get the 1 ooze. The 1 ooze token, that is. So you've got 2 oozes in play. Then if your opponent can just immediately kill the Biogenic Ooze, which they're going to want to do because if they don't do it quickly, suddenly that other ooze will be a 3/3, even if they do kill this other ooze. You still have left behind a 2/2 token, and while that's not a bomb, that's not going to feel like a bomb in those scenarios, the fact that that is your worst case scenario, your opponent has to use 1 card to take away, you know, maybe half or 3/4 of your card, since you get to keep the ooze no matter what, the other ooze. That's pretty good. I mean, they could also play a sweeper. That's going to be even worse. But the point is, as soon as this comes into play, it's going to start getting out of hand. By the end of your turn, you already have 2 3/3 oozes. Then, if you get to untap, you can just start making an ooze every turn, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. If this stays in play for even just 2 turns, you're going to win the game off of it very rapidly. Next up, we have Ravager Worm. So, with this coming with Riot, it comes with some nice flexibility. It also has 2 abilities that it can do when it enters the battlefield, but it's really not going to feel that flexible and limited. You're not going to be destroying a land with an activated ability that isn't a mana ability in this format. Instead, though, you'll be fighting one of your opponent's creatures, which means that this guy comes into play and kills something and leaves behind a very relevant body. Whether you go with a +1/+1 counter or haste will really depend on the situation. That's what's so great about Riot. If you really need to kill something that has 5 toughness, you're going to go with the +1/+1 counter so the Ravager Worm can take it down. If your opponent has no blockers and the biggest creature they have is a 4/4, well, then maybe you're going to have it come into play as a 4/5, kill that 4/4, and attack your opponent. No matter which option you choose, he's going to have a huge impact on the board, as creatures that say enter the battlefield, destroy target creature often do. But what he has that a lot of those creatures don't have is size. At number 5, I have Spawn of Mayhem. If you can get him in play with Spectacle, he's going to be ridiculous, and it is a doable thing. I mean, if you get a really nuts hand where you play, it doesn't even have to be that nuts, you play a 2-drop, you attack with it and get in for some damage, and then Spectacle him into play on turn 3, your opponent's in a lot of trouble. But even if you can't Spectacle him into play, you have a 4/4 flying trample for 4 mana, and not only that, he starts doing damage to both you and your opponent every turn. And if you're the one with the 4/4 flyer, chances are that damage is going to be scarier for your opponent. Furthermore, that damage is going to make sure future Spectacle cards can be cast for their Spectacle cost. Then, if your life gets low enough, he starts to get even bigger. He's not as fancy as some of the cards on this list, but he's monocolored and he's powerful. And for that reason, I think he's an easy first pick over the other cards we've talked about so far. Some of them might be more powerful, but the gold ones are less likely to make the cut in your deck because of having more difficult mana costs than a card like Spawn of Mayhem is. At number 4, I have Sphinx of Foresight. So a 4-mana 4/4 with flying and the ability to scry you on your upkeep every turn would probably already almost be a bomb. It would be like a B+. Might not quite make the list, but that's very powerful. It's a creature that can attack really, really hard relatively early in the game, and it makes your draws a little better. But then you add the opening hand clause that it has here, and it gets really interesting. Being able to scry 3 at the beginning of your game is going to drastically improve your draws. You'll be able to keep 1-landers, you'll be able to mulligan to 6 with a little bit less fear. I mean, you still might not get your Sphinx, but you can keep a 6-card hand that's a little mediocre more frequently if this also ends up in your hand. And in addition to that, it can just kill your opponent in the air. So it's a pretty great bomb. At number 3, I have Serif of the Scales, another 4-mana, 4-power flyer, our third one in a row. This one comes with the ability to gain Vigilance and Death Touch, which are both pretty nice keyword abilities and kind of work well together. The Vigilance half makes it so that you can block with this and use its Death Touch ability on your opponent's turn when they attack you, if that's what you need to do, and use it to trade with anything after you've Bastion for 4 in the air. Then what really pushes this over the edge is that it comes with Afterlife too. So if you look at this in terms of mana efficiency, you're paying 4 and you're getting 6/5 worth of flying. Yes, they don't all come into play at once, but that's still some amazing efficiency. Especially when you add in the fact that this can trade with anything because of the Death Touch ability, and then you're also getting 2 Spirit tokens. So it's just awesome. It's gold, but I think it's better than most of the monocolored bombs in the set. Although we're going to see there's 2 more monocolored bombs to come at the top of this list, and one of them is Scarhen Hellkite. Another card with Riot. This one gives you an option between a 5-mana 4/4 with haste and flying. That'll be the option you choose when you're trying to close out your opponent. But I think the best thing to do, especially in games that are a little grindier, games where you're at parity or behind, is actually to have him come into play with the counter as a 5/5. And then he has this very powerful activated ability that you can use to go after your opponent, to go after their creatures. You can divide the damage so it can take down multiple X1s. If you have 8 mana, you're doing 4 divided as you choose. So most of the time, I do think you choose the +1/+1 counter unless you can close out your opponent. And the fact that you have both those options, again, Riot and the flexibility it gives you is amazing. Makes this the second biggest bomb in the set. There's only one card I would take over it, and that card is Angel of Grace, which you probably expected would be at the top of this list. Another flyer. This one is a 5-mana 5/4, which is awesome, but it comes with flash and flying. Okay, if that was already just the card, it would probably sort of be knocking on the door of being a bomb. An A- might not make the list. Most of the cards on this list are solid A's, not A-, but it would be close. As is, the fact that it has all this other text pushes it all the way into full-blown bomb range. When a creature's this big with flash, it also means you're going to probably eat a creature with it most of the time, and it's going to be amazing. The ability to make it so you don't lose the game if you're about to go to 0 life or whatever is also pretty awesome. I don't think that will come up super often, but it is some nice text to add to the card. and the fact that you can sort of combo it with itself. You can like flash it into play, use that less than one ability, block your opponent's best creature, and if you have to trade your angel just to survive, she can give you a little bit of value from your graveyard and get your life total back up to 10. So she's the biggest bomb in the set. I don't think there's anything I would ever first pick over her. Well, that's it for this week's MTG Top 10. Next week, I will be back with the final MTG Top 10 in my series of videos looking at all the guilds, finally looking at Orzhov. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.